Though today often being considered something of a joke, during their prime the Reliant Robin, Regal and Rialto were in fact serious cars meant for mass consumption, due to their ability to exploit a loophole in the British licensing system that made them far cheaper to own than conventional four-wheeled cars. Because of this, the Reliant company would become one of the most successful car brands in Europe and occupy a market share in the UK that was second place only to the premier British Leyland during the mid-1970s, though changing economies and the rise of cheap city cars like the Ford Fiesta meant the products of the Reliant company would lose their once primary position during the 1980s. The Reliant Motor Company was first founded in 1935 by works manager T.L. Williams and his colleague E.S. Thompson, when they decided to continue a series of three-wheeled motorized vans that had been built previously by the Raleigh Bicycle Company, the firm's first model, which was built in Williams' back garden in Tamworth, being essentially a motor-powered tricycle with an aluminium body. This home-built prototype would eventually lead to a full production model, and proved to be incredibly popular among milkmen and postmen across the West Midlands, being cheap to run and only requiring a comparatively inexpensive motorbike licence. Reliant's first model, the 700 weight, soon finding itself being something of a viable alternative to early motor cars such as the Austin 7. Demand was so high that, in 1936, Reliant purchased the former Midland Red bus depot in Paisley on the banks of the River Tame and turned it into their main factory, this being followed by World War II, after which the UK was subject to severe rations on both steel and fuel, which lingered well into the 1950s, compounded further by the likes of the Suez Crisis in 1956, in which oil imports suffered during the brief conflict. It was during this period that Reliant proved itself to be a highly innovative company when it came to addressing the needs of the people, as in the face of Britain's post-war economic slump, much of the working population was unable to afford either a regular car or a full motorcar licence. In 1950, the annual driving licence for an average family four-wheeled car, which fell into Group Category B, was 7 shillings and twopence or £12 in 2024, a cost that was beyond the reach for many working-class war-torn families. However, Reliant noticed an interesting loophole in the British motor licensing system, whereby motorised tricycles and cars weighing less than 0.5 tonnes, which sat in Group Category B1, could be procured on a motorbike licence, which cost only 3 shillings and 7 pence per year, or £6 in 2024. It was in this that Reliant saw the potential to provide a motorised tricycle with the body of a regular car, allowing for the protection and comparative comfort of a motorcar, but with the cost savings on licensing of a motorbike, thus leading to the development of the company's first three-wheeled motorcar, the Reliant Regal. The Regal took many of its underpinnings from the latest version of Reliant's current motorised tricycle model, the Reliant Regent 10 hundredweight, which took a three-wheeled motorbike and fitted it with a hardwood frame covered in aluminium panels, the Regal prototype being assembled in 1951 and presented at that year's Cycle and Motor Show. This was followed by the launch of the first production car at the 1952 Motorcycle Show, which had revised many of the design features from the prototype in order to save further on weight and price, the Regal presenting many innovative structural elements that were also ideal for the steel rationing of the 1950s. The body, for instance, was made of aluminium fixed onto an ash hardwood frame, which itself was mounted atop a steel box-section chassis, while more weight was saved from the prototype by replacing the original glass wind-up windows with perspex, and the car was fitted with only one windscreen wiper. For power, the Regal Mark I was fitted with a 747cc side-valve water-cooled engine derived from the pre-war Austin 7, providing 16 horsepower, a 0-60 time of 25 seconds, and a top speed of 65 miles an hour, the car being 10 foot long, 4.5 foot wide, and weighing only 0.4 tonnes, easily undercutting the dimensions of the equivalent Morris Minor, while also matching the requirements of the B1 Group Category licence. In terms of fuel efficiency, in a time when petrol cost 11 pence per gallon, or £3.19 in 2024, the Regal presented an average fuel consumption of 50 miles per gallon, while by comparison, an equivalent full-size family saloon, the Morris Minor, had an average fuel consumption of 26.9 miles per gallon. The Regal Mark I entered sales in 1953 and immediately caught the attention of potential buyers and motoring critics due to its ability to slip through the ever-present loophole in driving licenses, with the interest garnered by the Mark I encouraging the creation of the Mark II in May 1954, which made further modifications to the design through the fitting of a fiberglass top, bonnet lid and rear end for additional weight saving. The Regal Mark II was also offered as a 500-weight van from 1956, replacing the Reliant Regent after 21 years of production, though before the Regal could truly make a name for itself, the price of aluminium in Europe sharply increased in early to mid-1956, and therefore Reliant chose to rework the Regal into a fully fiberglass car, with the exception of the steel chassis. In November 1956, the Mark III was unveiled, and differed through the replacement of all aluminium panels with fiberglass, and the addition of flashing indicator lamps rather than semaphores, while retaining the same engine and ash hardwood frame, followed by the Mark IV in November 1958, which improved the electrics, and in June 1959 by the Mark V, the first Reliant product to be moulded as a full car in fiberglass. In November 1960 came the Mark VI, which revised the styling further to make it look like a conventional family saloon, and was also the first Regal to be fitted with an ignition key rather than a starter button, this car also being the last to be fitted with the 747cc power plant, as from October 1962, seeing the success of the model, Reliant undertook a comprehensive modification of the type to create the Regal 325. The iconic Regal 325 was the first of this model to be built using a unitary construction body of reinforced fiberglass, being moulded into two major units, outer and inner, before being bonded together and bolted to the steel chassis. The original 747cc side valve engine was replaced by a 600cc water-cooled four-cylinder overhead valve engine, which improved the fuel efficiency to 65 miles per gallon, and the performance was improved to 23 horsepower, presenting a 0 to 60 time of 23 seconds and a top speed of 70 miles an hour. The Regal 325 being launched as a saloon in 1962, followed a year later by a van version. In 1965, Reliant introduced the Regal 325 Super, a trim package with some minor internal refinements, including a new streamlined front, smoother rear styling, refined trim, a new dashboard, repositioned handbrake, and enlarged door pockets, as well as 6 colours. The Reliant Regal Supervan 3 was also launched, which included a similar number of cosmetic modifications, while the Regal range was rebranded the 330 in 1969, when the 600cc engine was upgraded to 700cc, and the performance increased to 30 horsepower, the Regal Super series of cars being the point that Reliant became a formidable player on Britain's motoring stage, with 50,000 examples being sold by 1969. Regal production continued until November 1973, upon which Reliant launched what would be their triumph, the iconic Robin, a car designed to challenge the likes of the Leyland Mini, as well as updating the general image of the company's three-wheelers to suit the 1970s. Penned by Letchworth-based design consultancy Ogle Design, the Robin differed from the outgoing Regal through the fitting of a 750cc four-cylinder engine producing 32 horsepower, presenting a 0 to 60 time of 17.9 seconds, a top speed of 73 miles an hour, and an average fuel consumption of 50 miles per gallon, while the car was again of a full fiberglass construction mounted to a steel chassis, and also fitted with an anti-roll bar to give increased stability. On the subject of handling, while a popular myth has it that the Robin and its stablemates were susceptible to capsizing when cornered too tightly, the reality was that the car was much more stable than one might suppose, and would only tip over if the driver actively sought to, at most cocking its rear wheel during evasive driving. Regardless, the Robin was a massive success upon its launch, coming only a month after the start of the 1973 oil crisis, and while larger car builders struggled to create economy models to try and recoup their substantial losses, Reliant rose through the sales charts as working-class buyers picked the Robin over equivalent small motor cars like the Mini and the Fiat 126. By the mid-1970s, as the Chrysler-owned Roots Group, which included such marques as Sunbeam, Humber and Talbot, collapsed into bankruptcy, Reliant became the second-largest car builder in the UK behind British Leyland, with production outsourced to Mabea of Greece between 1974 and 1978, as well as to Sunrise Automotive Industries of India, where it was sold as the Badal. Another significant advantage of the Robin during the 1970s was its full fiberglass construction, as during this period, many complaints were aimed at the poor rust-proofing of regular family cars, such as the Mini, the Morris Marina, the Ford Cortina, and the Vauxhall Cavalier, though the Robin was able to circumvent these problems. Such was the success of the Robin that the company chose to use the model as a basis for their proposed replacement of the 11-year-old Reliant Rebel, the Reliant firm, contrary to popular belief, also creating four-wheeled sports cars like the Sabre and the Scimitar, as well as four-wheeled family cars such as the Rebel, which had been unveiled in 1964 as a fiberglass-bodied alternative to the Mini and the Hillman Imp. The Rebel, however, only ever sold 2,600 units, due largely to the fact that it had no dedicated production line, and thus cars had to be slotted in among the far more popular Regal 325, this machine leaving production during 1974, but had been provided its own dedicated assembly line from 1971, meaning that Reliant could build a new four-wheeled fiberglass economy car without it interfering with Robin production. The result was the Reliant Kitten, as launched at the 1975 Motor Show at Earl's Court, and was designed by the Ogle Consultancy, this machine adopting a similar appearance to the Mark I Reliant Robin, and was powered by the same 848cc engine, which produced 40 horsepower, thus giving the car a top speed of 80 miles an hour and a fuel consumption of 60 miles per gallon. Thanks to adapted rack and pinion steering, the Kitten also had a formidable turning circle of just 23 feet, and was made available as a saloon and estate, the car being fitted with either black or brown cloth reclining front seats and Robin door cards, while the dashboard was a direct translation of the three-wheeler, but with a different center console and a much longer gear stick due to the engine being mounted further forward. The front suspension had a Reliant-designed double wishbone arrangement with tie bars and a front anti-roll bar, while in October 1976, a revised model called the Kitten DL was launched in saloon and estate versions, which featured a new interior with scimitar-style door cards, new fabric seat covers, real inertia front seat belts, and revisions to the suspension and front anti-roll bar, making the car handle and ride better. January 1977 saw the launch of the 600-weight Kitten van, which could be supplied with or without a passenger seat, which increased the load capacity from 43 to 53 cubic feet, and while the van was based on the Kitten estate, it had round headlights that resembled the Robin and the first Kitten prototype. The Kitten was more successful than the Rebel, but was still unable to carve out a place in the market against the likes of the Mini, the Ford Fiesta, and the later Austin Metro, and thus, by the time production ended in 1982, only 4,551 units had been sold. However, the Kitten's life wouldn't end in 1982, as it was followed during the same year by the Reliant Dolphin, which appeared at the NEC Motor Show, and was a CKD kit that was exported to India by Reliant to Simpani Autos, the only difference between the two being a slightly different front grille, the Dolphin remaining in production until 1990, and was sold as the two-door original and the five-door Montana. As for the three-wheelers, by 1981, the Robin's design was now 8 years old, and thus the car was replaced by a facelifted model called the Reliant Rialto in January 1982, the Rialto including a new wedge-shaped fiberglass body with a galvanized chassis, but retained the 850cc aluminium water-cooled four-cylinder engine of 1975, producing 40 horsepower and whisking the car to a top speed of 85 miles an hour and a 0-60 time of 16.1 seconds. The Rialto would soldier on alone as the only three-wheeler in the Reliant product range until 1989, whereupon the Robin model was reborn in order to try and revitalize the ailing popularity of three-wheeled motor cars in the face of rising city car and hatchback trends, the new Robin bringing across many features from the Rialto, including the galvanized chassis and aerodynamic look, as well as the 850cc engine. However, reviving the Robin did little to reverse the fortunes of the Reliant company, especially in the 1990s as various new cheap hatchbacks were unveiled, as while the Robin and Rialto provided lower fuel costs, didn't rust, and were still able to exploit cheaper driving license costs through the ever-present regulation loophole, four-wheeled economy cars benefited from better practicality, superior performance, and structural rigidity. This, in combination with the average price for small family hatchbacks having decreased dramatically over the decades, meant Reliant in the early 1990s was facing a terrible collapse in revenue and the possibility of bankruptcy. Having been juggled between various owners since 1962, Reliant's woes were compounded when its then parent company, a local house builder, collapsed into administration during the 1992 economic recession and the subsequent downturn in the housing market, with the majority share this firm had in Reliant being sold as part of a bankruptcy auction to Beans Engineering, and then in 1996, it was sold again to Jonathan Haynes. Noticing the increasing losses being incurred by Reliant as the Robin and Rialto continued to lose popularity, Haynes chose to follow the Rover Group's tactic with later versions of the classic Mini by making their retro models less mass-production machines and more novelty collector's items, with designer Andy Plum being brought in to give the cars added luxuries such as wood trim, leather seats, and retro-styled upholstery. To further reduce the company's expenditure, the Rialto ended production in 1998, and during the same year, the company moved from its Fazeley plant to a new factory at Plant Lane in Burntwood, while in 1999, a new facelifted version of the Robin was unveiled, which made the profile smoother and lathered the interior with various features to make it comparable to its rivals. At the same time, research was undertaken to restart the four-wheel kitten range for launch sometime in either 2000 or 2001, but nothing more than prototypes came of the project, with Haynes, in response to the company's indecisiveness with regard to the four-wheel model he wanted to bring forward, eventually selling his shares and leaving the firm in 2000. By this time, the company was producing only 50 vehicles per week, and the demise of the Robin was finally announced in 2001 when shareholders chose to invest in the much younger Piaggio 8 range, as well as French-built microcars. With the end of the Robin announced, the last 65 units were built as special edition variants costing up to £10,000, including leather trim, walnut veneer, a numbered plaque, red carpets, a radio, a sunroof, white dashboard dials, chrome door handles, front fog lights, and Mini-Lite alloy wheels. This wasn't fully the end of the Robin, though, as Reliant sold the production rights for the car to the Sudbury-based B&N Plastics, who intended to sell two versions, the BN1 as the base model and the BN2 as a luxury model. The BN1 featured all the additions of the limited production Robin Special Edition cars as standard, while the BN2 added higher-grade materials for the interior, a custom metallic paint finish, a radio CD instead of a radio cassette, and front electric windows as standard. Unable to meet demand, and with over 200 orders unfulfilled, B&N Plastics ceased production in late 2002, following an argument with Reliant over the sourcing of parts, while at the same time the company had failed to gain type approval for Robin production before they were allowed to start building cars, and thus owed a fine of £100,000. As for Reliant itself, it was renamed Reliant Parts World and continues to provide spare parts for Reliant models, both young and old, from a small factory on the outskirts of Cannock, while the former Reliant factory in Tamworth was demolished in 2000 and turned into a housing estate called Scimitar Way, a final nod to the area's former association with mass-production motoring. To summarise, the Reliant Robin and its kin, despite it now being considered a comedy car due to its three-wheeled arrangement and odd proportions, was in many ways an exceptionally forward-thinking and innovative design that cut out many of the problems that plagued much larger and more notable machines like the Mini, including the adoption of glass fibre construction and the fact that it was cheaper to run and license. However, even though the car was something of a market leader when it came to the widespread distribution of economy cars, its continued lack of a fourth wheel limited its applications, and once its rivals at Ford and British Leyland had become conscious of the need for more city cars on the market in the wake of the oil crisis, nothing could be done to save Reliant from its inevitable downward spiral.